They thought it was just another hot day at the pier, a chance to mess with the lifeguard they'd been eyeing all summer. But when one of them slipped behind her chair and groped her in full view of the crowd, the laughter from his friends was loud enough to cut through the roar of the waves. Alyssa's jaw tightened, her sunglasses hiding the flash of fury in her eyes. The ocean behind her glimmered in the afternoon sun, and in that moment, she knew exactly how she'd make them pay. Alyssa Price, 25, had been a lifeguard at Clearwater Beach for 4 summers straight. She'd handled rowdy tourists, panicked swimmers, and more than a few drunken brawls on the sand. But nothing had ever felt as personal as this. The incident started earlier that day when the group of 4 guys locals in their early 20s with too much free time and not enough respect decided she was their entertainment. It began with whistles and catcalls while she was scanning the water, then escalated into crude jokes about her uniform and how she must enjoy the attention. Alyssa ignored them at first. Lifeguards learned to tune out noise. But these guys weren't content to be background static. When she stepped down from her chair to check on a group of kids splashing near the break, one of them followed her, brushing too close. She told him to back off, her tone firm but professional. His smirk only widened. The other 3 egged him on from the pier, and that's when he made his move, hands grabbing her from behind, squeezing with a crude laugh that turned every nearby head. For a split second, Alyssa froze. The sting of humiliation burned hotter than the sun on her skin. People were watching, families, children, and even some of her coworkers in the distance. She wanted to turn around and plant a fist in his smug face, but years of training told her not to lose control on the job. The lifeguard code was clear. You protect lives first, and you keep your composure. But composure didn't mean forgiveness. She turned slowly, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You just made the biggest mistake of your summer," she said quietly enough for only him to hear. He laughed it off, muttering something about her needing to lighten up. Alyssa stepped back, assessing them the way she'd assess a riptide calculating patient, waiting for the perfect moment. The rest of her shift passed like a slow boil. She kept watch on the water, but her peripheral vision tracked the bullies' every move. They lingered on the pier, sometimes swimming in the shallows, sometimes tossing a football in the surf. They didn't realize she'd spent most of her life in and around the ocean. Training in rescue dives, competitive swimming, and even water-based combat drills for lifeguards in high-risk zones. If they thought she was just another pretty girl in a red suit, they were about to learn otherwise. By the time the sun began to lower toward the horizon, Alyssa's plan was fully formed. The water was cooling, the crowd thinning, and the pier shadows stretched long across the sand. The bullies were still there, laughing like they owned the beach. Alyssa knew she couldn't humiliate them, on land, not with her boss watching from the tower, but out there in her world, things would be different. The ocean was her territory, and tonight it would be their lesson. Alyssa didn't have to wait long. The bullies wandered closer to the lifeguard station, dripping salt water and reeking of beer they'd smuggled in under a beach towel. Their leader, the one who had grabbed her, smirked as if nothing had happened. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and tanned, the color of someone who'd never had a real job indoors. The others circled him like hyenas, each emboldened by the group's bravado. "You still mad?" Baywatch, one of them, called out, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves. "We're just having fun." Alyssa stepped down from her chair, her bare feet sinking into the warm sand. She kept her posture relaxed, her voice calm. "I'm giving you one warning," she said, her gaze sweeping across all 4 of them. "You keep your hands to yourselves, you stay out of my way, and you leave this beach without making a scene." Or what the leader cut in stepping forward, his smirk widening. "You gonna blow a whistle at us?" His friends laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all day. She didn't blink. "Or you'll find out what happens when someone thinks the water is their safe place, and they're wrong." They exchanged glances, the challenge in her voice too tempting for their egos to ignore. One of them, shorter and wirier than the others, leaned forward. "What's that supposed to mean?" Alyssa let the corner of her mouth lift. "It means if you think you can keep up with me out there." She nodded toward the darker, deeper water beyond the buoy line. "I'll race you. Winner gets bragging rights. Loser, well, you'll see." They laughed again. But it was the kind of laugh meant to cover uncertainty. The ocean was calm but deceptive. Beyond the buoys, the current pulled hard toward the open gulf. Most swimmers didn't go that far unless they were trained or foolish. The leader puffed out his chest. "You're on. But I'm warning you, sweetheart, I don't lose." She tilted her head. "Neither do I." The moment was set. Alyssa knew exactly how this would go. She'd push them, just far enough, to make them uncomfortable. Then teach them how small and powerless they could feel when the water decided they didn't belong in it. She wasn't going to hurt them, at least not in a way that would leave marks, but she was going to make sure they'd think twice before touching anyone without consent again. They waded in together, the water cool against sunburned skin. The bullies splashed laughing, tossing challenges back and forth. Alyssa moved ahead of them with effortless strokes, her body cutting through the water like a blade. She could feel their eyes on her, half admiring, half competitive, but she stayed focused on the current, the depth, the wind. By the time they reached the buoy line, two of them were already breathing heavier than they should have been. The leader was still grinning, though, and the smallest one tried to mask his fatigue with taunts. Alyssa treaded water easily, scanning their faces. "This is where it gets fun," she said, her voice low and steady. "Past this point, you don't fight the water. You respect it. Keep going, if you dare." And without waiting for their reply, she dove forward into the deeper blue, the bullies splashing after her. The trap was sprung, and Alyssa could almost taste the moment their confidence would crumble. The first 50 yards beyond the buoy felt deceptively easy. The water was glassy, the sky streaked with the orange and purple glow of sunset, and the bullies were still laughing as they swam. Alyssa paced herself, letting them think they were keeping up. She could hear their breaths growing ragged, the occasional cough, when a wave slapped salt water into their mouths. She glanced over her shoulder. The leader was still behind her, determined not to fall back. But the other three were starting to drift, their strokes sloppy and uncoordinated. They had no idea the current was slowly pulling them diagonally toward the rip channel, exactly where she wanted them. "You're slowing down already," she called, feigning mockery. "I thought you said you don't lose." One of them tried to respond, but swallowed water, instead sputtering. Alyssa hid her smirk. The deeper water was colder, the waves taller. Out here, the pier looked smaller, the shore further away. She stopped treading water with the easy rhythm of someone born to it and let them catch up. The leader's smirk faltered for the first time. "This far enough for you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Not yet," Alyssa said. "Just a little farther. Past that shadow line." She pointed to where the water darkened, a sign of the deeper trench. "Unless you're scared." "Scared?" The wiry one scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously. "Please." They pushed on. Every stroke brought them into colder water and a stronger pull. The laughter was gone, now replaced by heavier breathing. Alyssa could see it in their faces. They were beginning to understand they were out of their element. When they finally reached the trench, she stopped again, letting them cluster together, chests heaving. The sun was lower now, and the colors on the horizon had deepened to fiery reds. Shadows stretched across the water, and the gentle lap of waves in the shallows had turned into a rhythmic heave that made them bob like corks. "This is where it gets real," Alyssa said, her tone calm, almost instructional. If you get tired out here, you can't just stand up. You can't touch bottom. You either know how to handle it or you panic. The smallest bully gave a nervous laugh. We're fine. Alyssa's expression sharpened. You won't be in a minute. Before they could react, she lunged toward the leader, hooking her arm under his in a textbook rescue hold. His eyes went wide. What the? Struggle, and you'll both go under, she warned. Then, with a sudden kick, she pulled him under the surface. Not far, just enough for the salt water to fill his nose, the darkness of the deep to press against his eyes. She surfaced a moment later, releasing him so he could gasp for air. What the hell is wrong with you? He sputtered, panic now cracking his voice. Lesson 1, she said coldly. The water doesn't care about your ego. The others stared suddenly, very aware of how alone they were out here. Alyssa swam toward them slowly, like a predator closing in. The leader was already trying to swim back, but the rip was pulling him sideways. She let him struggle for a moment, planting the fear deeper before turning her focus to the next target. Her trap was working perfectly. The fear was setting in. And soon they'd learn just how powerless they were when she was the one in control. The wiry one was next. Alyssa moved toward him with slow, deliberate strokes, her eyes locked on his. Panic flickered in his expression. He was already breathing too fast, arms thrashing in a wasteful dog paddle. You're burning energy, she said, evenly circling him like a shark. That's how people drown. I'm fine, he snapped. But his voice cracked, betraying the fear. Without warning, she surged forward, grabbed his ankle, and yanked. His head went under with a sharp splash, and when he came up coughing, she was already behind him, locking an arm across his chest in another rescue hold. He flailed, but she kept him afloat effortlessly. Struggling only makes it worse, she murmured in his ear, her voice low and cold. You think you're tough. Out here, you're just another body in the water. She held him for a moment longer, letting the reality sink in, then shoved him toward the leader, who was still floundering against the current. Both were gasping now, their bravado stripped away, replaced with wide-eyed desperation. The two remaining bullies were clustered together, trying to keep calm, but failing. One was pale, the other muttering curses under his breath as if they could keep the fear away. Alyssa swam toward them, letting the current carry her so she barely seemed to move her arms. You're gonna get us killed, the pale one shouted, his voice breaking. Alyssa stopped just short of them. No. I'm going to teach you what happens when you cross a line. Before they could react, she dove under, slicing through the water beneath them. The pale one screamed when something tugged his calf, her hand, and then he went under. She pulled him down just far enough to feel the cold pressure of depth before releasing him, watching him kick frantically to the surface. His friend's eyes were huge now, darting between Alyssa and the dark water below. You're crazy, he yelled. Crazy, she said, her breathing calm and steady despite the workout. No, just done being your victim. Now, they were all clustered in a loose, panicked group. The shore seemed impossibly far, the pier lights just flickering on in the distance. Every direction looked the same dark heaving water. The leader tried to rally them, but his voice shook. We just swim back, all together. Alyssa tilted her head. Good idea. But here's the thing. If you panic, the current wins. If you burn out, the current wins. And if I decide you need one more lesson? She let the words hang, letting them feel the weight of her control. She swam around them slowly, each stroke smooth and confident. They watched her, like prey watches a predator, afraid to turn their backs. The water wasn't rough, but it didn't have to be. The psychological grip she had on them was stronger than any wave. Finally, she stopped, letting them see the shoreline again. I'll get you there, she said. Her voice clipped. But you're going to remember this every time you look at the ocean. One by one, she hooked her arm under theirs, towing them toward the shallows with effortless efficiency. They coughed, sputtered, and clung to her grip, all traces of arrogance washed away by the tide. By the time their feet touched the sand, their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. Alyssa released them without a word, climbing out of the surf with the same calm authority she'd had when she stepped off her lifeguard chair. They were quiet now, and that silence was the sweetest victory she'd tasted in years. The crowd on the beach had thinned, but a few evening strollers lingered along the shoreline, watching with mild curiosity as Alyssa emerged from the water, her red suit dripping her stride steady. Behind her, the four bullies staggered out, coughing and wheezing, too shaken to notice the onlookers. The leader's shoulders were hunched. The wiry one clung to his knees, and the pale one was bent over, spitting salt water onto the sand. Alyssa didn't bother looking back at them until she reached her lifeguard station. She turned slowly, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Her voice carried over the gentle crash of the waves. "You thought you could intimidate me. You thought this was your beach." Out there, she jerked her chin toward the dark water. "The ocean doesn't care who you are, and neither do I." The leader tried to muster a smirk, but it faltered almost instantly. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out, just shallow, shaky breaths. Alyssa knew that look. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the realization of their own vulnerability, the lingering echo of fear that would come back every time they stood near deep water. "You ever touch someone without their consent?" "Again," she said, her tone sharp and cutting. "And I'll make sure the next swim is one you don't finish." No one laughed this time. No snide remarks, no bravado. Just silence. The smallest one gave a stiff nod, unable to meet her gaze, before turning and trudging up the beach. One by one, the others followed their wet footprints, trailing behind them like a walk of shame. Alyssa climbed back into her chair, the high vantage point giving her a perfect view as they disappeared into the parking lot. Her heartbeat was steady now, her breathing calm, but the fire in her chest hadn't gone out. She'd kept control, no punches thrown, no screaming match, and still made her point in a way they would never forget. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, she adjusted her binoculars and scanned the shoreline again. There were still families playing in the shallows, a couple holding hands at the edge of the pier, a group of kids tossing a frisbee near the dunes. This was her territory, and she wasn't about to let anyone think otherwise. She knew the bullies would talk about what happened. Maybe they'd twist the story to save face, but deep down, they'd remember the helplessness, the cold pull of the current, the way their lungs burned, the fact that she'd been the only thing between them and panic. That memory would be her insurance policy. For Alyssa, the lesson wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about showing that strength didn't always look like fists and shouting. Sometimes it looked like patient skill and knowing exactly when to strike, and sometimes the ocean made a better teacher than any lecture ever could. As the beach lights flickered on and the night settled in, Alyssa allowed herself the smallest of smiles. She had done her job. She had kept the peace. And she had made sure those four would never mistake kindness for weakness again. The ocean has a way of stripping away illusions. Out there, no amount of swagger or mockery can keep you afloat. Only respect, skill, and humility will. Alyssa's encounter with the bullies proved a simple truth. People who misuse power often crumble when faced with forces they can't control. Her calm, calculated response turned humiliation into a lesson that would follow them for years. Strength isn't always about fighting harder. It's about knowing when and how to act, so the lesson sticks. In life, as in the water, respect is earned, and those who ignore that truth often find themselves in over their heads.